mechanism of hysteria. Let us do some revision before we go forward. Last time we were reading preliminary communication, and in that preliminary communication, one important point which had come up was the mechanism of hysteria, the manufacturing process through which symptoms are generated, and we saw a few of them. So this was the sequence of hysterical event. First, there is some traumatic event out of which the hysterical symptom is born. After the traumatic event, the symptom appears. The symptom can continue to be dependent upon the traumatic event, meaning, let us say, while you were having dinner, something happened, and after dinner you had a traumatic event, you had some hysterical symptom, and therefore every time it approaches the dinner time or you are at the dinner situation, the symptom can reappear or some discomfort can reappear. So the symptom can continue to be dependent on that traumatic event, or the symptom can become independent. That the symptom appears in a way that we can't make out what the traumatic event was from where it emerged in the first place. And most hysterical symptoms are of this type, floating free, independent of the original traumatic situation. In fact, much of the therapy goes in finding out what was the traumatic situation. So it is almost like a wireless connection between the symptom and the original traumatic event. We can't see the wire connecting the two. And through various means, we have to establish the link between the traumatic event and the hysterical symptom. And much of the therapy goes in this. So what is the way out? In therapy, we revisit the traumatic event. So through free analysis, through analysis of all other problems, we remove all the side cobwebs and finally come to the traumatic event. We revisit the traumatic event and we do two things. One, we try to make the unconscious idea conscious, and the effect is felt and released. So there are two components of this in terms of memory. So what is traumatic about the traumatic event? It is some memory which is traumatic. Now what does this memory constitute of? This memory has an idea and feelings around that idea, and both together we call a complex. So we use the word the complex, which is an idea which is toned with feelings. So there is this idea and there is this feelings, and both of them are together. For example, in one of the cases that Freud discusses, he talks about a woman who was attending to a sick person, and while she was attending to the sick person, an unconscious desire which was romantic and sexual in nature rises up in her and is repressed very heavily, and then she develops some other hysterical symptom, and then Freud through analysis tries to establish that hysterical symptom to this particular event. Now when he reaches there, two things come up. One, a thought or a desire of a sexual romantic nature, and feelings that it arouses. It arouses feelings of excitement, of pleasure, and intense feelings of fear and guilt. So the feelings of excitement and happiness are more, fear and guilt are less, but all the four feelings are aroused. And there is this thought, the desire of romantic sexual nature. So there is this desire or thought of a romantic sexual nature, and feelings are aroused in response to it. And these feelings are unacceptable to morality, so everything is just repressed down. But because it cannot be successfully repressed down, something leaks out in the form of a symptom. So this whole thing we call a complex, the idea and the feelings which tone that idea, power that idea. And these two are very important elements of what is there in the unconscious, which is making it difficult for us. That memory of the traumatic event actually is an entity which includes two elements, the element of thought and element of feelings. And the feelings and thoughts are together held in one entity, which we call the memory of that event. So, while we revisit the traumatic event, we have to make the unconscious idea conscious, and the affect has to be felt and released, which we call as catharsis, which is very important. And Freud says if the affect is not felt and released, only the intellectual work is done of making the unconscious conscious, partial relief happens or no relief happens. In our everyday experience, we realize 5 to 10% relief happens. So unless affect is felt and released, relief is partial and temporary. So let us now look at how the symptoms are related to the traumatic event. And the fundamental law of psychic world we see here in application is the law of association. So in manufacturing of a hysterical symptom, the primary law which is in operation is the law of association. And this is a very common law in a working of the human mind. That when you think of a friend, you think of any event which you had with that friend. When you think of your childhood, you think of your school. When you think of your school, you think of your teacher. One thing leads to another. The law of association is continuously in operation. So one memory is linked to another memory, and retrieval happens based upon these linkages. So the law of association is a very powerful law, a very fundamental law of human mind. So it is in operation in creating symptoms also. Let us see the ways in which it operates in the creation of a hysterical symptom. Root 1, the symptom is literally related to the traumatic event. For example, in one of Freud's cases, a woman saw a dog drinking water out of a glass, and the host did not know and offered water to her from the same glass. And out of courtesy and politeness, she could not refuse. She drank the water, but it was so disgusting, anger and pain-provoking that she developed a revulsion to water thereupon. And the hysterical symptom thereupon was she would try to avoid water, feel disgust at water, feel vomiting sensation, nauseating sensation related to water, and almost develop what is called hydrophobia, fear of water, especially drinking water. So here we see the hysterical symptom is literally related to the event. Saw water getting contaminated, dirty, and develops a revulsion towards water. Now, second situation can be that when the traumatic event happened, some element of the environment in which the traumatic element happens, that element is taken and the symptom is manufactured linked to that element. For example, let us say we take the case of what Freud describes and we try to develop it in a different way. A woman is attending to a sick man, and while she is attending, a sexual impulse arises. And at that point, right, it is repressed severely and she feels enormous disgust. And when she looks with her eyes at that very point, she sees, right, the pillow in front of her. And now the pillow gets associated to that image. So whenever she sees a pillow, an element of disgust and fear arises in her. And it is more fear and less disgust. Fear on the top, in the front. So there seems to be a phobia of the pillow. But in fact, the real fear is of the desire coming down. So here we see a hysterical symptom is created such that the symptom is linked to some element which was really present in the environment of the traumatic event. So it was not that she felt the sexual impulse towards person X who was related to her in a particular way, and therefore that person is completely kept away. But something from that environment, that scene, it's almost like taking a screenshot and finding one element from that screenshot to create a symptom out of. So the second way the symptom gets created. Third way, it is association of anything to the traumatic event. That, let us say, it is very common of small children being abused by a priest. We listen to it in media all the time. One published case was, there was a person who started feeling terrorized when he would see a church. And on the surface, he was a very neutral person, neither pro-religion nor anti-religion. And he could not make out why he fears the church so much. And then upon analysis, it came out that as a child, he was abused by a priest at his home, not at the church. But somehow the fear of the priest and the priest associated to the church created the fear of the church. So something which is associated to an element of that situation of trauma, it's one further association. So one further association comes up, and that is how it gets created. Then we have even more subtle connection of the symptom to the traumatic event in terms of the meaning of the symptom. So there may be a symptom creation, and the link of the symptom to the original traumatic event may be the link of meaning. At times it can also be a linguistic link. Right? So the example can be taken of the Carl Jung's case that Carl Jung talks about, where a woman who was diagnosed for schizophrenia was doing continuously the action of stitching, as though she was making a shoe. So this stitching action was continuously done by her, and she had completely withdrawn otherwise into a state of what we would call of negative symptoms of psychosis, schizophrenia. I mean, she was schizophrenic, diagnosed for schizophrenia. And it came out that a few years back, she was abandoned by her lover who was a cobbler. And ever since that event, she started slowly withdrawing. And after the withdrawal was complete and the onset of psychosis and schizophrenia was complete, she has been doing these signs, these continuous actions of stitching. And here we see the traumatic event, or sorry, the symptom is linked to the traumatic event through a meaning. The linkage can also be through a linguistic association. Any questions on this?
No, sir.
Now let us go back to the preliminary communication. Yeah. Can we start from here?
Yeah. At first sight, it seems extraordinary that events experienced so long ago should continue to operate so intensely, that their recollection should not be liable to the wearing away process to which, after all, we see all our memories succumb. The following considerations may perhaps make this a little more intelligible. The fading of a memory or the losing of its effect depends on various factors. The most important of these is whether there has been an energetic reaction to the event that provokes the effect. By reaction, here we understand the whole class of voluntary and involuntary reflexes, from tears to acts of revenge, in which, as experience shows us, the effects are discharged. So here, just a quick question in the middle. If we look at the example of the daughter who was attending to her sick father, an event such as the death of the father may be such an external event that may lead to her reducing the reaction to that event. Is that what this is trying to say?
What it says is that there are 2-3 things that this paragraph says, and in fact what this paragraph talks about is something that we have not understood completely even today. The first point is this: it says that the extraordinary events experienced long ago continue to operate intensely. So last time we had said that normally we see everywhere in the world that things have a shelf life, and if you don't do anything over a period of time, things taper off, they degrade and they disintegrate. That's a natural uh, process through which any entity passes through, right? So you, for example, you leave anything on the table, you close the room and come back after 10 years, 90% chance is that it would have degraded in small or large parts of itself. Now that's a very natural thing to happen. But what we see here is that it seems certain parts of memory are prone to that kind of degradation over time, right? That kind of attrition over time. But certain parts of memory, they retain their effect even after a long period of time without any diminution. So this brings us to the idea that now this leads us to the question, what kind of memory would degrade and what kind of memory would continue to exert its effect after years without any reduction in its power? So that answer we don't have. Probably we are looking at a kind of a non-linear situation where if the effect that the memory arouses is to a particular extent, then the shelf life reduces over a period of time naturally. But if the effect evoked by the event is of beyond particular threshold, then the law of attrition does not apply. On the contrary, the memory starts affecting the mind in a way that it starts becoming the hub, and then spokes are created where new events get interpreted in the same way. And in fact, small satellite representations of the same original template are created to create a full constellation of pathology. So we are looking here at a situation where if affect evoked crosses a particular threshold, then the second thing happens in memory, and if it is below a particular threshold, the memory is subject to natural attrition. What is that threshold? What is the unit of effect? Like if we talk in terms of electricity, we can talk in terms of ampere and volt. Now, what are our units in cases of effect? We don't have any such units. So because we have not theorized in those terms, we are not able to be very precise here. We are not able to be quantitative even in an indicative sense. And therefore, all we do is qualitative description of the phenomena by saying that there seems to be a threshold before which, if the effect is evoked, it is subject to the law of natural attrition. If it is beyond the threshold, it almost becomes a timeless entity in the unconscious. And therefore, many people make this argument that the unconscious is timeless, that there is no time in the unconscious. What happened when you are 6 months of age can still create pathology for you when you are 55 years of age. And therefore, the unconscious seems to be timeless. But a more precise analysis would be this kind of thing. And this brings us to a second natural question. How is affect produced? How is affect manufactured? On this point, Freud does not have anything to say. Nor does much of psychoanalysis have much to say in a serious way. I mean, you can make a comment if you want, but nothing very convincing or serious. Not something very profound. And there the question is, how do you manufacture affect? What is the manufacturing process of this entity that we call the affect? And this answer is very important, because if we don't know the manufacturing process of affect, then how do we stop new affect from generating? The only way is to make the unconscious ideational content of the complex conscious that enables us to a certain extent. But it still does not give us a very fundamental explanation of how affect is generated. What are the variables involved in this affect generation? If we look at affect as the final dish to be prepared, what are the recipe ingredients which go into that dish? Okay. So we can talk of any affect, happiness, sadness, anger, fear, but what is the manufacturing process of any affect? On that, psychoanalysis does not have much answers. Freud also does not have much answers. Very few people have, very few people even have theorized. What I have done is, if you are interested in that part, I have created a model of the mind called HEAT, Holistic Elemental Analysis and Therapy. And one of the major elements of this in this theory is trying to discover the manufacturing process of the affect. And there we have no option but to take recourse to Eastern psychology, because in Eastern psychology we describe how feelings are generated, and the description there is in terms of life energy being pulled by an idea. So the idea there is that in the chakra system, right, let us say we talk about love. So what happens is the system would say that love is an emotion of the heart chakra. So what happens, let us say you meet an old friend of yours, and an old friend of yours comes in front of you. The moment that stimulus is received by you, it is interpreted by the system that an old friend is in front of me whom I used to like very much. So suddenly the heart, so now the system says it is an occasion for activating the emotion of love, and the love is in the heart chakra. So in the heart chakra, energy starts moving, and this idea that I have recognized somebody I used to like and have met after a long time, and this is an occasion for generating the emotion of love. This decision attracts life energy which is otherwise flowing neutrally towards itself. It is like a magnet attracting iron. So you have this chakra where the decision has been taken to evoke an emotion of love at some intensity, say on a 10-point scale at 7. So this life energy which is moving free is taken towards it because of something which is deposited here, which I call as affinity. Someday I'll discuss my own model of the mind. At that point, I will go into details of all this. But the point here is, in that model of the mind that I have put forward, there is a description of how affect is generated. Right? So when we say that a traumatic event has happened, affect has been generated, now two things have to be done. One, the generated affect has to be removed for immediate relief, right, and healing of the pathology. And second, we have to make sure the person does not generate a similar kind of affect in future, for which we have to go into the affect generation process. Okay? So affect generation process is something which is not described well in psychoanalysis. I have tried to do it in my model of the mind, but what Freud says here is the most important of these is whether there has been an energetic reaction to the event that provokes the affect. Meaning, if the affect generation is very less, right, usually you will not end up creating a hysterical symptom. A symptom will be created, or any psychological problem will be created only and only if high amount of negative affect is generated. Nobody is going to die out of happiness. People will die out of sadness. Nobody is going to die out of happiness. So strong emotions, when we say, we are referring to the strong negative emotions. So when we look at psychopathology, we are essentially looking at a situation where, because high volume of negative emotion was generated, the possibility that a psychological sickness can happen, that possibility comes into play. So the most important of this is whether there is an energetic reaction. Meaning, what do you mean by energetic reaction? High volume of affect is generated. That is what Freud means by energetic reaction to the event. Meaning, as a result of the event, high volume of emotion was generated. By reaction, we here understand whole class of voluntary and involuntary reflexes, from tears to the acts of revenge. Which means the affect generation may be conscious, may be unconscious. And most of the times it is completely unconscious, and the person says, when this event happened, I never felt anything. It was a very normal event. He does not know what happened in the unconscious. So the affect generation may be conscious, may be partly conscious, partly unconscious, or maybe completely unconscious. And completely unconscious at times is not so difficult to make out. For example, somebody says, I was extremely attached to my grandmother. When the news came to me that she had died, I just did not feel anything. Obviously, there was too much to feel, and therefore you decided not to feel. So because you did not feel anything is a very strong evidence that there was too much to feel, and therefore nothing was felt. So the affect generation may be conscious, partly unconscious, or completely unconscious. And what happens? Acts of tears and revenge are some of the ways in which the affects are discharged. So out of affect generated, if much of the affect could be discharged, again the chances of pathology are very low. So situation 1, affect generated itself is low, chances of pathology are low. Affect generated is high, but most of the affect is released either by crying or by revenge or by some energetic action, maybe even violence. In all such cases, the chances of pathology are very low. But if the affect generated is high and much of the affect cannot be released either in weeping or in violence or in some energetic action, then the chances of pathology are very high, because we have very high volume of unprocessed negative affect. And this is the core. High volume of unprocessed negative affect in the unconscious mind. This is the matrix for all pathologies to emerge. Specifics dependent upon the personality of the person and what is the type of negative affect involved. But generically speaking, huge volume of negative affect generated and not processed and resident in the unconscious mind, that becomes the soup for evolution of pathology. Linguistic usage bears witness to the fact of daily observation by such phrases as cry oneself out. The injured person's, if the reaction is suppressed, the affect remains attached to the memory. Is it clear? If the reaction, meaning if the release, by reactioning is release, if the release of the emotion generated is suppressed, the affect remains attached to the memory. An injury that has been repaired, even if only in words, is recollected quite differently from one that has to be accepted silently. So let us say somebody beats you in public, very humiliating. You are able to swear at that person the worst words possible. You may not be able to beat that person, but the fact that you are able to publicly swear at that person, that itself relieves you of much of the potential for pathology. But if the situation is such that you cannot express in any way your reaction, then everything is bottled up inside and the chances for pathology are very high. The injured person's reaction to the trauma only exercises a completely cathartic effect if it is an adequate reaction. For instance, a revenge. Which means if your reaction is not adequate, if adequate amount of affect is not released, now we don't know what is adequate. It might depend on the volume of affect. or there might be a law of percentage. We don't know what is at work. But the qualitative part we can say is, if a substantial part of generated affect is not removed or released, the chances of a hysterical symptom or any psychological problem are high. Yeah, Kiran.
Language recognizes this distinction too in its mental and physical consequences. It very characteristically describes an injury that has been suffered in silence as a mortification. The injured person's reaction to the trauma only exercises a completely cathartic effect if it is an adequate reaction, as for instance, revenge. But language serves as a substitute for action. By its help, an effect can be abreacted almost as effectively. In other cases,
here what he says is that just by using language, by expressing in words, right, screaming, swearing at somebody, we can take verbal revenge, and that itself often is a substitute for real action. So swearing at somebody that I will kill you or you will die may be a substitute psychologically for actually killing that person. You don't have to actually kill the person. Just swearing at him that he will, yeah.
does narrating the incident without such emotions also help?
5 to 10%. Something better than nothing. Uh, what helps in that case is, one, you feel light because you have vented out what was there inside. One. Two, somebody has listened to you and not criticized you in a therapy setup. Three, if you can analyze it deeply in a 360-degree way, then in that case, a 360-degree deep intellectual analysis also gives you some benefit. People who do cognitive therapy or people who go into narrative therapy, they use this. That you narrate something from all the angles till you are exhausted in terms of the narration. Nothing is left out. And that also gives you some benefit, because when you go deep into narration, some effect, wanted, unwanted, willed, unwilled, does come up. And the very fact,
narration therapy is a beneficial therapy, right?
sorry?
So narration therapy would qualify as a beneficial therapy.
Yes. It is a good therapy, one good approach, but it is very slow, and the difficulties are two. One, it can be very slow. Two, narration and cognitive thinking can also be used as defenses against the feelings. And if that situation comes, which comes very often, then the deeper relief to the person is not felt. So where it is helpful is when something is half processed inside in search of a narration, and the very act of narration gives you a closure and stops that discomfort because of something half processed inside. One. Two, you want a closure and the narration gives a closure. Three, you want understanding and the narration gives you understanding. Fourth, you want articulation of unconscious desire and the narration gives you articulation of unconscious desire. So there are areas where it helps, but more often than not, it can be easily used as a defense. The method can easily be used by our defenses to actually prevent or postpone the healing. So what I do is I make use of it in terms of articulation of desire, but you can do this more in the context of pure psychoanalysis than in the context of psychoanalytic psychotherapy. Can you think of why?
I can think of the fact that going a little beyond just the narrative of the incident may help you, if I may say, sensitize yourself to the incident more from the root as compared to a superficial band-aid approach of a narrative therapy.
So in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, when people want quick results and they are not there for exploring themselves, then we don't attend to the affect. They feel it is too slow and they are not making progress. But if somebody has come for pure psychoanalysis and is interested in analyzing everything from every corner, then we can bring in the spirit of narrative therapy, cognitive therapy, and also Lacan's articulation of desire into the classical process of psychoanalytic psychoanalysis. In those cases, if the person is ready for so many sessions and is ready for long-term therapy, then we can go into that kind of a synthetic mode. Yeah, Kiona. In other cases,
yeah. In other cases, speaking is itself the adequate reflex when, for instance, it is a lamentation or giving utterance to a tormenting secret, for instance, a confession. If there is no such reaction, whether in deeds or words, or in the mildest cases in tears, any recollection of the event retains its affective tone to begin with. Yeah, like we discussed. Yeah.
you can see that in certain cases, for example, a confession, the moment a confession is made and accepted without attack and criticism, that itself provides relief. And in therapy, it often happens that people tell the therapist what they would not tell to anybody else. And the very fact that they are able to articulate it and feel safe after the articulation also provides them with relief. So, unloading of a tormenting secret, that itself reduces negative affect which otherwise one was suffering.
Abreaction, however, is not the only method of dealing with the situation that is open to a normal person who has experienced a psychical trauma. A memory of such a trauma, even if it has not been abreacted, enters the great complex of associations. It comes alongside other experiences which may contradict it and is subjected to the rectification by other ideas. After an accident, for instance, the memory of the danger and the mitigated repetition of the fright becomes associated with the memory of what happened afterwards. Rescue and consciousness of present safety. Again, a person's memory of a humiliation is corrected by his putting the facts right, by considering his own worth. In this way, a normal person is able to bring about the disappearance of the accompanying effect through the process of association.
So we can also see how retrospective re-evaluation cognitively at times also can help us. For example, somebody says something to me, right, and I feel humiliated. And when I sit to think about it, and I come to the conclusion that he was not wrong, he was right in what he said. It was not actually a humiliation intended. Right? He was just angry for something and it said something. And when I think it is my mistake, the moment I say it is my mistake, the humiliation goes away. And the corresponding affect also goes away. So this also is a situation where the way we think leads to creation of affect or dissolution of affect. The cognitive therapy route of managing the psychological health. So this is also true, though not true always, that this also
there's a very thin line between doing this genuinely and doing this in order to not be able, say, for example, someone has said something to humiliate me and I am trying to run away from my feeling of anger towards that person. And so I may create such a solicitation of that person's comment in my head.
Right.
Yeah.
So a genuine cognitive change and using cognition as a defense of rationalization are two different things. At times it may happen that we use the defense of rationalization, right, where we try to think something so that we don't have to feel the feelings associated with something, and they keep going in the unconscious mind, and consciously we feel everything is logically solved and sorted. So we feel logically sorted, but emotionally we are not sorted, because the cognitive exercise we did was of rationalization, not of a real cognitive change where affect can be released. Can you see the difference in the way cognition is used in both the cases? Case 1, cognition is used in a way where the affect which was generated because of certain interpretation of an event, the cognition just puts to pieces the original evaluation of that event, and therefore the effect which is generated dissolves away. Situation 1, which is the real way in which cognition has to be used. Situation 2, we use cognition only for rationalization, and therefore the affect gets repressed in the unconscious mind and keeps collecting till one day it will explode and create a big problem. Right? So can you see the two different things? In both the cases, cognition is used. In one case effectively, in the second case not effectively. Now the question would be, if there is an effective way to use cognition to dissipate the affect which is created, is this not the universal solution to everything? The answer is no. If the affect generated is very strong, it's very difficult to dissolve that affect by using a cognitive means, and therefore the only way remains by and large is to feel that affect fully and let it go. Only cognitive approach in most cases does not give result when the affect under question is of very high volume, and therefore in such cases the cognitive approach many times does not work, and we have to take the in-depth psychology approach, be it psychoanalysis or ISTDP or EDT or emotion-centered therapy and so on. Any questions, Kiona?
No.
Is it clear? The use of cognition effectively and the use of cognition as a defense.
Yeah.
Okay. So both the situations happen, and in practice we find both the situations. You can see we can see it in our own life also. At times, the very way we change thought leads to a change in feelings. For example, you think certain things about a friend of yours or a student of yours, and when you get some more information about him, your thinking completely changes, your feelings completely change. So just a cognitive piece of information changes the way you feel towards the person. So this is where the affective change is brought about by a cognitive change. And we also realize in therapy that often, no matter how many times we cognitively understand the phenomena, unless the affect is brought out, we don't get relief. This also is our experience. So in our life, all of us, we experience both the situations. One, where cognition can lead to total relief. Two, where no amount of cognitive work will lead to total relief. This is an experience. Both experiences are experiences of practically everybody who has gone into therapy. I'm talking of people who go into therapy with moderate to severe difficulty, not with mild difficulty. If you go into therapy with mild difficulty, maybe cognition itself can be enough for you. In this way,
one second, I'm just trying to find the line.
in the paragraph on ab reaction, we have, it's the last line. In this way, a normal person
In this way, a normal person is able to bring about the disappearance of the accompanying effect through the process of association. To this, we must add the general effacement of impressions, the fading of memories, which we name forgetting, and which wears away those ideas in particular that are no longer effectively operative. Our observations have shown, on the other hand, that the memories which have become the determinants of hysterical phenomena persists for a long time with astonishing freshness, and with the whole of their affective coloring. We must, however, mention another remarkable fact, which we shall later be able to turn to account, namely that these memories, unlike other memories of their past lives, are not at the patient's disposal. On the contrary, these experiences are completely absent from the patient's memory when they are in a normal psychical state, or are only present in highly summary form. Well, okay.
The astonishing freshness and with their whole of affective coloring. So we can see for years together what happened in our childhood that retains its power. And we see that in pathology again and again. A person comes to therapy at the age of 45 and we discover the problem is in when something happened to him when he was 2.5 years of age or 3 years of age.
Okay.
So the memory and the power of the memory in the unconscious mind remains astonishingly fresh and powerful over a long period of time, almost as though they are not subject to the law of temporal attrition.
Right.
We must, however, make so the patient has consciously forgotten everything, but in the unconscious mind everything is fresh and active and powerful. So consciously,
does that mean that the patient hasn't felt the emotion enough?
Yeah, it may be that he has not felt anything at all, because many of the traumatic events can be completely unconscious.
So how are they detected, sir? How are they detected?
So that is the whole job of psychoanalysis. How do we get into the unconscious mind? So what are the entry points into the unconscious mind? Anyone? How can we get into the unconscious mind? What are the tools we have?
One, like we discussed, is in narration of the incident, which probably through association will take you into your subconscious.
Yeah. So first is free association. We ask the person to speak whatever comes to his mind without any constraint, and in that free association the unconscious leaks out. Second, we look at, second can be hypnosis. Third,
Yes.
dream analysis. Fourth, art, creation of art. And fifth, slips. Slips of tongue, slips of language, slips in writing. Sixth is state creation. In ISTDP, we create a state. And through that state, we try to open up the unconscious. And the seventh is by analysis of the life of the patient. That when the patient describes to us how he is living, how this event happened, how that event happened, and we analyze those events and find a pattern underlying them. That gives us an insight about how the unconscious mind is operating. For example, let us say, I gave an example last time that often when the food is very good, by mistake, I bite some part of my lips and I hurt myself in a self-destructive act. And this happens repeatedly. When I tell you this event from my life, what surmise can you make about my unconscious mind?
You believe you don't deserve good in your life, and that comes from good food.
Right? So there is an operation of guilt, that I don't deserve good things in life because in the unconscious mind, I have done something which is guilt provoking and I deserve to be punished for it. So the second question would be, what can be those guilt provoking elements? What does theory tell us? In most common human beings, or let me say most human beings without the adjective. As we go into theory, we will get to know what are the common issues in most people, and those are the first answers we have, the provisional answers. That if guilt is in operation, what are the most likely events in the unconscious mind which can provoke a guilt? A, B, C, D, E, which have been discovered by Freud, by Klein, by Winnicott, by Kohut, by somebody else, and so on. So as we go into these theories, we will develop that ready-made checklist which you can impose upon experience. Okay? And then in discussion, it comes out whether this provisional analysis is correct or not. And this is one more way of knowing the unconscious mind. So these 7 ways are the ways of knowing the unconscious mind. Any more questions, honey?
No, sir.
Okay.
Clear.
This is the whole job that we have to do in psychoanalysis, right? Unconscious mind is where we live most of the times, or we try to live. So difficult as it may be, this is all that we are trying to do, to know the unconscious mind and manage it to the best extent we can. Okay. Yeah, Kiona.
Okay. On the contrary, these experiences are completely absent from the patient's memory when they are in a normal psychical state. Sorry. Not until they've been questioned under hypnosis do these memories emerge with the undiminished vividness of a recent event.
So we can see that in the unconscious mind, the memories are very vivid. There is no decay, no temporal decay of an event. Whereas in the conscious mind, we feel the decay has happened. So under hypnosis, we see, and the same thing can come out in normal psychotherapy also when we don't use hypnosis. As we will see later, Freud stopped using hypnosis and started using only free associations. And today, very few psychotherapists use hypnosis unless they are doing hypnotherapy. That's a different issue. But in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, very few people would be using hypnosis.
Thus, for 6 whole months, one of our patients reproduced under hypnosis with hallucinatory vividness everything that had excited her on the same day of the previous year during an attack of acute hysteria. A diary kept by her mother without her knowledge proved the completeness of the reproduction. Another patient, partly under hypnosis and partly during spontaneous attacks, relived with hallucinatory clarity all the events of a hysterical psychosis, which she had passed through 10 years earlier, and which she had for the most part forgotten till the moment at which it re-emerged. Moreover, certain memories of etiological importance, which dated back from 15 to 25 years, were found to be astonishingly intact and to possess remarkable sensory force. And when they returned, they acted with all the effective strength of new experiences.
He's giving examples of real life where they see that something 25 years old, 35 years old comes up in memory so vividly as though it had happened yesterday. And in the unconscious mind, it was always vivid. So we see the timeless element of the memory in the unconscious mind, at least the ones which are highly loaded with affect, which are causing trouble to the patient. And when Freud uses the word hallucinatory here, right, he only means intense vividness. He does not mean hallucination as we understand it today. So hallucinatory vividness means very intense vividness, right? Not the DSM definition of hallucination. I'll send you a new link in a moment.